good afternoon or good morning. It's still 11:37. Uh, um, I am Caroline Sanders, Commissioner for District 4, and I have the pleasure of welcoming Senator Jeff Irwin for our conversations with Commissioner Sanders. I'm excited. I have not had an opportunity to really chew the fat with Senator Irwin in any longer period of time for a minute. We see each other here and there, but we haven't really had a chance to like get caught up on the things that are going on in Lansing and that are affecting us in District 4 and then, our greater Washington County community. So, Senator Irwin, please tell us, like, who are you? How'd you get here? How long have you been dabbling in this very precarious thing called politics?
Sure. Well, hey, thanks for having me, Commissioner Sanders. We do run into each other all the time around the community. And it's always great to see you, but I appreciate you setting up this time to talk a little bit about some of the things we're working on and, push that out to the community so more people could understand what's happening in their local government, what's happening in Lansing, why it matters. I always appreciate those opportunities. So thank you. You asked me to sort of run through my sort of, creation myth as a local elected official. And so, my path, I think I would be remiss if I didn't mention that. I grew up in Sault Ste. Marie in the eastern side of the Upper Peninsula, and I grew up in a family where my family was involved in politics. So my father ran for state legislative office when I was 1 and served until I was 13. And so, as a very young person, I learned a couple things that I think a lot of folks don't have access to. One is that politics and government service is something that regular people can and do, right? Just growing up in that environment very much demystified for it, the whole process for me. And that's something I try to do in the community all the time for folks is just say, hey, you can run, there are opportunities to serve and we need people to step up. And so that was never a strange thing to me just because I grew up in a kind of strange environment. And the other thing I learned as a young person being the child of a politician was I did not want to get into politics. I thought that was a really bad life choice. So anyway, went through high school, ended up going to high school in the East Lansing area, and then I came over to Ann Arbor to go to the University of Michigan. I was planning on, I wanted to maybe be a writer or maybe go into the law or do something that would allow me to argue and pay my mortgage. And what happened is when I was at U of M, I started reading things and I started getting involved in things and I started learning a lot about a couple issues that were very motivating to me. One was housing and homelessness. I was seeing the homelessness in Ann Arbor. I was seeing the issues with affordability of housing, both for students and for non-students in the community. It really felt like we were moving away from having a community where people who worked here could live here. I thought that was detrimental in a variety of ways. And also, poverty has always been very motivating to me. Like, what can we do to help? What can we do to give a handout to help other people? That's just like a motivating factor for me. And what I realized was that, the path to helping folks, there's a lot of different paths, but one of the most productive paths was through government. Because I got interested in those issues, I started noticing this group of people in town called the Homeless Action Coalition who were trying to pressure the city and the county to do more on these issues. And there was a proposal to build a homeless shelter down in Pittsfield Township that was very controversial at the time. Anyway, that's kind of the environment that was happening when I was in college. The other thing that happened to me is I started reading more about environmental issues. And I was always interested in preservation of the environment. I come from the UP. I like to camp and backpack. I still like to go canoeing and things like that. I really enjoy that kind of thing. And so I always came at it from this kind of preservationist standpoint of, well, let's protect these beautiful things for future generations. And I think that's still very, very important. But what really got added to my knowledge and understanding during those college years was I started reading more about sort of the public health impacts of environmental contamination. I started reading more about how toxic chemicals were affecting our physiology. They were affecting our long-term health. They were affecting our sexuality. They were affecting all these things that are important to me, right? And you see relatives dying from cancer, and you see that connection, and all of a sudden it's like, wow, we should be doing better with this. We've done all these things in the last 50 years to change how consumer culture operates and how products get into our environment, and we've let so many new chemicals into our environment, so all these new plastics, and I'm persuaded, I'm convinced that we need to do a better job of controlling those waste streams and controlling what we use and what we burn into the air, because I think it affects our health and our happiness. And I want to promote health and happiness. And so those two issues really kind of got me fired up. I was waiting tables in town at a restaurant, and I met somebody who was, involved in the environmental movement, and that led me to a job opportunity. And then all of a sudden, someone mentioned to me like, "Hey, there's a seat open on the county board of commissioners." And because I think, growing up in the environment I did, I thought, what's the worst that could happen? Sure, I'll run. Because this person reached out to me and said, the Democrats are having a hard time recruiting somebody in this area, and you live in this area, and maybe you should think about running. Okay, what the heck? What do I have to lose? And then I realized what I had to lose was nights and weekends, because I ended up winning. It ended up being a four-way race, and without going into all the details of what happened politically, I ended up being successful, and I served on the county board for 11 years, and it was a tremendously valuable experience for me, because I was able to be a part of building a new homeless shelter in Ann Arbor. I was able to be a part of increasing the county's investment in affordable housing issues. And I also got to learn about a whole bunch of issues that I'm very interested in now, but I wasn't as interested when I first ran. Things like mental health care. That was not something that was, top of mind for me when I first ran as a 21-year-old. But when I saw what the county was doing, and I saw how important that was to keeping people stable and keeping neighborhoods stable and keeping communities stable, I thought, okay, I need to learn more about this. I need to learn more about substance abuse treatment. I need to learn more about what's happening in our jail and why it looks the way it does. And so all of these things were very interesting to me, and I was able to get very involved in them as a result of the public's willingness to vote for me way back in 1999. And so that was my first entry into local politics and local government service. And I was very fortunate to arrive with a group of commissioners who all had their own different experiences and their own different ideas about what they were trying to accomplish on the board. And so it was a great experience.
So you triggered something there I didn't know we had in common, which is that you were recruited for commissioner as I was. Um, I was clueless about it, clueless. Didn't know really what it took. Um, and kind of had a four-way race myself. I had three other Democrats and then a Republican running. Um, so I think you've already answered this, but I'm making the assumption that you derived more joy than heartburn. That's kind of my term when people ask me how's it going. I get a lot of joy and I've got a little bit of heartburn in your experience. Um, but also, I'd like to say that I think we're both fortunate in that I think Washington is a special place to be in terms of um, what our residents believe in, what they want us to deliver, and what they allow us, what they support us in delivering. I'm not bad mouthing other counties. I say that as a transplant to Washtenaw County, a proud transplant that has come here and chosen to stay because I think there's more like mindedness than difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I came here. I wasn't expecting to stay in Ann Arbor. I was expecting to go elsewhere, but really fell in love with the Ann Arbor area, the Ypsilanti area. Washington County is a great place, and it's really because of the people. That's one of the things I feel like I've learned over my years is that places are pretty wonderful, but people are more important. I love the mountains. I love the lakeshore. There's a lot of really great places, and sometimes I ask myself, why have I stayed in this place so long?
Mhm.
And it's really not because of the geography, it's because of the people. And
Mhm.
so I want to sound a heavy note of agreement. And to get back to, yeah, I think what something you started with there, uh, my one of the things I often try to explain to people about my experience in public service in terms of like my level of enjoyment and how it feels is I like to compare it to child rearing, right? So I've been a parent for a little while now. I'm not quite to the end of that road yet. Maybe there isn't really an end of that road. But
Never.
as my kids are getting a little older now, I'm starting to think like, There's some interesting parallels here. Like with government service, on a day-to-day basis, it doesn't always feel great. It doesn't always feel like, you know, this is going perfectly. But
Right.
when you look back and you say, okay, what did we accomplish in the last year? What did we accomplish in the last 5 years? What did we accomplish in the last 10 years? And you start to actually seriously think about those things. It's like, yeah, that experience of passing amendments to the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act may have been incredibly frustrating. It may have taken a decade. There may have been a lot of moments where you were really in a valley
Hmm.
during that fight. But in retrospect, it was worthy. It was great. We got it done. I'm incredibly proud of it, right? I think about the frustration I'm having right now with trying to support the wages of our direct care workers across Michigan who serve our
Oh my
seniors and
God.
disabled people. Incredibly important issue to me. It's been one of the things I'm most proud of in the last 6 years is we've gotten those wages up by $4 an hour. Still not enough, but making progress. Well, just 2 weeks ago, the Republicans in the House proposed cutting all of those wages down to minimum wage, taking away that $4 wage increase, which still isn't enough, by the way. And so, like, once again, in this tactical moment, I'm incredibly frustrated. I'm really, frustrated and sometimes even angry about like the fights that we have to engage in to try to get, I think, what the community deserves. But at least in my experience, oftentimes when I look back, I think about the fights more that we've won than the fights we've lost. Whereas maybe in the moment, I'm a little more focused on the fight. So,
Hmm.
yeah, that's my analogy about how it feels. It's been incredibly rewarding. I'm incredibly grateful to the voters and the public and all that to have given me these opportunities because I would have not had the opportunities to help people like I have had if not through government service.
Hmm.
I don't think, but on a day-to-day basis, sometimes it feels very frustrating.
Yeah. You touched on direct care. Um, every term I vote against um, what I know we don't have any control over in terms of allowing a certain sector of the direct care workers employers to opt out of our county wage. Um, and I do that for protest. That's the only protest that I can show. I also know the other commissioners are going to pass it, but for me, whether or not the direct workers see it or not, it is a vote of defiance in support of them because I cannot imagine what it would be like to have a family member that needed their care and not to be able to find anyone of quality because of the low pay and not being able to afford to subsidize it, personally with extra money. And I don't
Yeah.
think people really you don't get it until you're in that situation. For me, it drilled home during COVID. I won't get emotional, but when a lot of people they were left to their own devices. And what do you do if you have a severely handicapped or ill family member that needs that support, but they're not going to do it for, a pittance of wages? And no one in their right mind should expect that. If any of us were just to do their job for one day, just one day, we I don't think that we would have this back and forth about it.
Yeah.
Um, I'm not going to go down a rabbit hole about that, but um,
Well, I might, because this is an incredibly important issue to me, and I might get emotional about it too, because you're right. There are people who are really suffering in silence, and then we have tens of thousands of people who we're expecting to go out there and do this difficult, intimate, challenging job on behalf of the public, and we pay them a criminally low wage. You pay them a wage, even with this $4 premium, that is lower than they could make in an entry-level job in a number of other places. And so, if we expect our seniors and our disabled residents to get quality, consistent care from somebody who's going to show up and be trustworthy and be caring and be focused on the care of this person rather than their own poverty and their own desperate
yeah,
situation, then we need to pay these people a living wage. And we're not now. And so, it's important for those hundreds of thousands of people who depend on that care. And it's also important to those workers as well. We need to ask ourselves, why is it that we don't respect this work enough to pay them a living wage. And it's because of
Absolutely.
history, it's because of misogyny, it's because of racism, it's because of who does these jobs. But we, regardless of why, we need to fix it.
Absolutely. And it should not be a partisan issue.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I made some progress on this when the Republicans were still in control of the Senate, precisely because of, I think, what you're saying, which is that everybody faces the challenges of old age and of health challenges. And so, one of the things that's really hard sometimes is to get conservatives to care about a situation that they are not personally experiencing themselves and their family.
Exactly.
And the thing
Exactly.
about this issue is that almost everybody is touched by this in some way or another, either dramatically or maybe just a little bit. But that's exactly how I try to work this issue: is go to some of these Republican colleagues and say, "Hey, look, this is happening in your community, right? You know what happens in your town and your county, and this isn't something that only happens to people of a certain color or sexuality. This is something that happens to everybody." And so,
Mhm.
because of that, I think we've made a little more progress on that. And because of that, I'm somewhat hopeful that we can negotiate, persuade, cajole, or otherwise move the Republicans in the House off of this horrible cut to these home and community based services, which, by the way, I would add are happening on top of the federal cuts. When you look at the federal cuts to Medicaid, nursing homes are guaranteed, but these home and community based services are not. And so it's likely that the federal cuts and the state cuts are going to focus on the services that are the most important to deliver. Look at this. People want to stay at home. They want to age in place. They'll be happier, healthier, live longer, and cost the public less if we
Yes.
let them age in place and help them age in place. Instead, we drive them into nursing homes, immiserate them, cost us more. It's so ignorant. And so, anyway, this is one of the important issues I'm working on right now in the budget, is trying to make sure that we, address these needs in a way that makes sense and that doesn't punctuate the problems that
Hmm.
we're seeing from the federal cuts.
Yeah. It's my grandmother actually lived to 107,
Wow.
and she passed away at 2:30 a.m. on the first day that our governor imposed a curfew, that we were literally on lockdown. And she lived in a nursing care facility for over 10 years. We're talking $9,000 a month. Went through all of her, she had a sizable amount of savings. It eviscerated that. And then, there needed to be, additional support. Who has $9,000 a month?
Sure.
And were it not for the fact that she had family members that literally were there every day, twice a day. And even though you're not supposed to, I would slip $5 or $10 in their pockets just as a tip, just to say I appreciate you. That I don't think people, they greatly underestimate that. And Jeff, going into a nursing home, then, in my opinion, starts to affect a family's ability to leave a legacy. Because when you own a home that you have the ability to pass down to other family members, but going into a nursing facility requires you to list and liquidate assets, then it's a pattern of trying to keep people from being able to avoid poverty. And I don't think a lot of people look at it that way, but they should, because
Systems
that's a
trap
real
people.
thing.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. These systems trap people, and we're constantly dealing with issues around Medicaid spend downs in the office. So whether it's Medicaid for somebody who is younger but needs Medicaid because of the wages at their job or some other reason, or whether it's a senior like you're talking about, where we really have no good plan for long-term care in the United States of America. Healthcare is a huge pain point for everybody, and that's one of the reasons why I take every opportunity I can to say we have to have a comprehensive national health insurance system where everybody's in. It includes long-term care, it includes vision, it includes dental, so that basically everybody's basic preventive care is covered, and we all pay for it together. That's
Mhm.
the sensible, efficient way to do it. So, not something we're going to be able to accomplish in Lansing, but something that I always try to take an opportunity to say that's the direction we have to go in nationally. I don't think there's any question in my mind.
Mhm. So I'm actually conducting this conversation with you. I am in Kalamazoo, attending the Michigan Works conference, and so you know what the conversation is about.
I
All
do.
of these cuts and how it's going to affect, the good things, the good programs that we do to help people reskill themselves, to get skilled or to reskill themselves, and to be able to move into maybe not an astronomical, but a slightly higher income bracket as based on those new skills. And so I don't know if you have any insight or thoughts into that. You don't have to, but since I'm here, I thought I would just give you an opportunity to just touch on that. And I just don't understand. I just don't think people understand seriously until it's too late the effects of all of these cuts that they're talking about. I mean, to try and save a couple of pennies that actually end up costing us more money.
Yeah, and I think that's very obvious when you talk about some of the workforce development programs that they're proposing to cut right now. And so, when you look at the Republican budget proposal from a couple weeks ago, writ large for the state of Michigan, there are massive cuts to healthcare and education in order to fund an increase in funding for roads. And, you know, when you look at those cuts, one of them that stands out to me are the cuts that they're focusing on for Michigan Works. And you're absolutely right, Commissioner, that these programs are programs that allow people and help people level up, in terms of their economic capacity, both to contribute to their own family budget and to the community. And, some of these kinds of programs that they're cutting are actually huge steps up for people. So, for instance, two of the big things that they're proposing cutting in Michigan Works are getting rid of the registered apprenticeship program and getting rid of something called Going Pro. And Going Pro is essentially a program working through, community colleges and training programs
Mm-hmm.
to, bring people into the trades. And some of these trades jobs are incredibly lucrative jobs that, are great opportunities for young people,
Mm-hmm.
great opportunities for folks that are in the middle of their career. And so cutting those off just really hampers our state's ability to grow, to meet the needs of employers, and to make sure people are able to, work in jobs that actually pay their bills. And so that's one big thing we're fighting about in the context of the budget. But when you talk about, this plan to shift billions of dollars from healthcare and education over to roads, there's a couple of things I would say about it. One is that uh, I think everybody wants to fix Michigan roads, but there are different ideas about how to do it. And one of the things I've been saying for years, and hopefully, more and more folks will become cognizant of this. If you look at how roads are funded in Michigan, it is manifestly unfair to the places where people live and where revenue is generated. So right now, when
Mm-hmm.
all the money goes into the state from gas tax and car registration, all the money that goes in to fix our roads and lottery, or no, lottery goes to education. I'm sorry, gas tax and registration fees. Uh, those dollars get split up by something called the Act 51 formula. And the end result of it is, it's complicated, but the end result of it is that residents in Washtenaw County get about $154 per capita to fix our roads in Washtenaw County from the state. Residents in Otsego, Mackinac, Wexford, Ogama, basically all the counties that have very few people in them, they usually get somewhere between $300 and $500 per person. And so, in other words, when the money goes in, our residents get half to a third of the support from the state to fix our roads as residents in more rural counties get. And so one of the things I keep trying to put on the table is that, look, if Wayne, Oakland, Macomb, Washtenaw, Genesee, Kent, Ingham, Kalamazoo, if those are all donor counties, if we're all losing, uh, why is it that you're expecting my residents to pay even more to send more dollars to those other places? And how can I tell my residents that if we do put more money into the formula, that's actually going to fix our roads?
Right.
We increased road funding 10 years ago pretty significantly, and it didn't improve the condition of our local roads because, once again, the formula is fundamentally unfair. If we want to fix the roads in Michigan, we could fix the roads in Michigan without increasing taxes by just fixing the formula. And so, but nobody from the other side of the aisle wants to talk about that because, once again, their residents are getting 2x to 3x times as much money for their roads as our residents are. So why would they want to have that conversation? What the
Right.
conversation they want to have is, hey, people from Southeast Michigan, could you please raise your taxes and send more money outside of your region? That's what they want. And so my involvement in that conversation has been to say, let's get a more fair formula. I'm willing to talk about, possible revenue enhancements, but what the Republicans want to talk about is robbing money from Medicaid, robbing money from our CMHs that provide substance abuse and mental health treatment in our communities, and taking money from our schools, our workforce development programs, our programs that support water quality and drinking quality. They want to cut the prisons pretty dramatically. They even propose cutting the state police. They basically propose cutting everywhere in order to be able to show that they could put more money in roads. And now they're basically asking us to fix it. And one of the most hilarious things is watching some of these Republican representatives say to their own communities, well, I know that was in the proposal I voted for, but that's not going to be the final proposal. They're trying to shuck and jive and say, oh, even though we voted for that, we know that the Senate is going to fix it, and we know that the governor will never buy that. So this was just an opening proposal. They're operating, I think, in bad faith. I think that many of them didn't even read the bill that they voted for, and now people like me are having to run around the state and say, here's what they're doing. Here's what they're proposing cutting. I mean, I'll just say a couple more things and I'll stop. In the higher ed budget, they're proposing cutting the University of Michigan by 75%. That's insane. The University of Michigan is the biggest economic development engine we have in the entire state, and I think it's a deeply irresponsible proposal. When you look over on the schools budget, it's amazing to see what they're fighting for and what we're fighting for. Dems are saying, let's put out, some grants that support things like smaller class sizes, universal breakfast and lunch, some grants that support our new literacy law to make sure that our early elementary classrooms have the highest quality materials and the teachers get extra training on literacy. We're trying to support smaller class sizes. We're trying to support school safety and mental health programs. That's what our budget is based on. The Republican budget, it all hinges on schools not letting transgender kids go to the bathroom or play sports, and ending diversity programs. So they're focused on this political culture war nonsense. Democrats are focused on, at least I think, things that actually matter to the provision of education in our state. And I just want the voters to see that and to read what they're actually focused on and what we're actually focused on, and to understand just how irresponsible what they're doing is.
Hmm. And many of all of those items that you named that are on the chopping block, they are all safety nets. And so when
Absolutely.
you don't have the safety nets, your cost skyrockets. They don't get that part, right? So if people are not healthy, what ends up happening is the people that you're sitting next to get unhealthy as well. And so we're all sitting in the hospital lobby. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter what your insurance coverage is. We don't live on an island. It's astounding to me, as a grandmother with a 5-year old that has just started public school. Um, to between his mother and I, we can manage to cover his lunch and breakfast and snack if necessary. But what about the legions of children that he will be in school with every day who cannot do it? And I say that as a single parent, Jeff. It was enough of a struggle for me to just cover my rent and clothing my daughter and myself and getting gas to go to work with spotty and very unreliable child support, if any. Lunch was, I mean, people don't really realize adding 3 meals to your already struggling grocery bill, and I'm a coupon clipper queen. Everybody is not that. And so what do you do? when we exasperate the homeless situation because we've got some family that now has to choose between paying their rent either on time or at all and making sure that their kids have something to eat on when they're in school, because then they end up being still our issue, our burden to bear if they're homeless or home insecure. um I'm yeah, I
Well,
it
you're absolutely right, and yeah, I think you touch on some really important points. And we know that kids learn better when they're fed. We know that a lot of parents really struggle with the costs of meals at school, like you pointed out. I would add to it, and I don't think, I mean, you don't need to hear this, but I would just add to what you said that it's also a time thing, right? It's the cost, but also, I've been fortunate to raise my kids with my wife, but even with two of us, sometimes there's a real time crunch. So it's the financial
absolutely.
crunch, it's the time crunch, and then you flip over to the school environment. And one of the great things about universal lunch and breakfast isn't just that kids are more well fed, they're going to learn better, all that. That's important. It's important to society's success of education, but also you reduce disciplinary problems,
Yes.
also reduce stigma. There's a lot of
Yes.
kids whose parents may kind of be eligible or ineligible from month to month, and that just creates all sorts of churn. And then
Mhm.
also there's an efficiency angle as well. When you have to have a school employee whose part of their job is to meter who gets the lunch and who doesn't, keep track of the
Yes.
money, do all the accounting and all of that, that costs time and money. And so why are we spending time and money on that when we could just roll that time and money into more breakfast and lunches and make it universal, make it efficient? So anyway, yeah, I absolutely strongly agree that this is an important thing. This is an important thing for families. I've heard from a lot of folks saying that um, this is a real help to them, and they really value this, and they really depend on it. And so that's one of the main things we're fighting for in the budget this year. And it's one of the biggest frustrations that we're still here in September talking about a budget that should have been done in June. Because if the
Right.
budget was done in June, then the school districts have time to plan. But when the budget isn't done, and when the Republicans intentionally drag their feet to try to gain extra leverage in the process, it hurts our schools, and it's already hurting them. So, you're already seeing this uncertainty in Ann Arbor. There are already
Mhm.
districts across the state who are saying we're not doing universal
Mhm.
breakfast and lunch unless the legislature follows through. Let me give you one more example. One of the things that the Senate is really fighting for is small class sizes in early grades. We know this is best practices. We want to tell districts that here's some extra money, that if you want to spend the extra money on small class sizes in early grades, you can pull from this pot and make it easier. Um, well, in order to make that happen, school districts have to hire these educators to put in these classrooms. Well,
Yes.
if the budget isn't done on time, how do they know whether or not to hire them? And so I still think it's important that we do this, but if we do, the schools are going to be scrambling and a little bit late to hiring these folks and getting these classrooms populated in the ways that they should be.
Correct. Correct. So, okay, so I do have two questions for you. One is that I would like for you to just briefly touch on the data centers that are proposed in our sort of living area. Not expansive, just only because I've been asked. I don't know what to say. Um, and then the other one is maybe even a little bit more controversial, if that's possible, which is I've not heard anybody talk about a sales tax increase. And I'm only asking you that, Jeff, because Michigan is still one of the lowest sales tax states in the US. We went kicking and screaming to go from 4% to 6%. I'm telling my age. And so I'm only asking you that because it seems as though, and this is where you can help educate me and others, it seems as though that is a more universal, across the board increase that doesn't target any individual demographic. It's just a flat across the board. You know, prices are increasing. We're facing all of these issues, but I've not heard any discussion about that. I'm not saying that I want to, but I might be able to better manage that as opposed to these cuts that are going to just decimate communities.
Yeah, I'll do my best with those and to try to do it quickly. You're asking about some of the data center proposals. There are a few different proposals in Washtenaw County right now in the district I represent to build computer centers, and folks are generally referring to them all as data centers. Personally, I think that that's probably a misnomer when it comes to the University of Michigan Los Alamos project for reasons I'll get into in a second. But anyway, it's kind of all part of this broader worldwide movement to build these large data centers to process all of the bits and bytes relative to the internet, but also AI. Right. And so they're requiring a lot more computing power. And so they're trying to figure out where are we going to locate this computing power. Now, years ago, this was like called the cloud. This is really not all that dissimilar than that because the cloud has to actually exist somewhere. It's not literally in the sky, right? There's like
Right.
a warehouse somewhere with a bunch of servers in it. Okay, so if you're going to build these, and they're building them bigger and bigger now, if you're going to build these, they require a lot of energy and they require a lot of water. And because of that, residents are, I think, rightly concerned about what does that mean for our community.
Hmm.
Um, there have been a lot of problems in Virginia, Memphis, I think around Atlanta. There have been a lot of news stories about data centers that were built 3 to 10 years ago that now are causing problems because they're using too much water or they're using so much electricity, they're causing problems for their neighbors. All right. So, within that broader context, the state of Michigan passed a law last year that did two things. One, it gave somebody who's locating a large scale data center in Michigan uh, a sales tax break so that if they spend money on servers, they don't pay sales tax on the servers themselves. So that was sort of the piece that the data centers and some of the big Amazon Web Services, Google, Meta, and all them wanted. What was also included in that legislation were a lot of requirements that these data centers would have to meet that aren't required of them in other states. Things like they have to use municipal water and they have to discharge to municipal water. The goal of this was to make it so that they wouldn't be pulling from groundwater or surface water in ways that would diminish those resources or maybe use them up. They're not allowed to use groundwater, they're not allowed to use surface water. The other reason for that amendment was to try to make sure that these data centers locate more in areas that have existing infrastructure. Even though these data centers usually don't have a lot of jobs, they usually do have a pretty high property tax element that they pay. And so it was certainly in my interest, just as one legislator of many, to say, hey, let's make sure that these are located, if possible, on brownfields or next to existing infrastructure. So we required them to be hooked up to municipal water. Now, that doesn't mean that water can't be extended. And I think when you look at the project that's proposed in Saline Township, that's not exactly in an already developed area. Then again, I think that project is not planning on using water cooling. That project is planning on using air cooling. Anyway, I'm not involved in all the
Okay.
imminent details with all these, but I'm just trying to share what I've heard. So there's that project in Saline Township that has not yet been approved by the local zoning officials. They're going to have to approve that. That project, like I said, I don't think is going to need water, but they are going to need electricity. Those really big data centers use sometimes in the area of like 1,000 megawatts, which is a lot. Okay, this other project that U of M and the Department of Energy or Los Alamos National Laboratories is proposing there on Textile Road is a slightly different kind of project. It's from an energy usage standpoint, they're predicting 100 to 200 megawatts. So it's somewhere between 10 to 20% of the size from an energy use standpoint. And they're currently in negotiations with Yucca to buy their water. They've committed to not discharge into the Huron. But we still don't know yet exactly where they're going to put their buildings and all of that. U of M has a fact sheet that they've put out that I think answers a lot of the questions that the public has. However, I think a lot of the questions that the public has aren't going to be fully answered until site plans are reviewed and released and publicized and that sort of thing. Because right now it's still kind of nebulous. But the big things that U of M has committed to that I think distinguish it from a commercial data center are that smaller from a standpoint of how many servers and how much energy they're going to use. Also, usually these data centers, these commercial data centers for like Amazon or Meta or whatnot, usually have somewhere in the range of like 5 to 10 employees after construction. What U of M is saying is that together with the Department of Energy, they're going to have 200 employees at $200,000 a year, plus another 30 to 50 employees that are like maintenance and security and that kind of thing. And so this is why when people say, hey, what about the data center in Ypsilanti Township? I always say, I know what they mean, and I don't think it's inappropriate for people to call it a data center, but I do think it's a very different project from a standpoint of size, employment, all those kinds of things. I think it's also important to mention that the U of M Los Alamos project is not going to pay property taxes. So one of arguably a benefit of the commercial centers is that they pay a lot of property taxes, but don't have a lot of jobs. The U of M project is kind of the opposite; has a lot of jobs, but doesn't pay a lot of property taxes. So anyway, that's a brief description, as brief as I could do, on these different projects. I think the Augusta project has already been approved by their local zoning board, but I think there are some citizens who are trying to bring that to a ballot with a petition. So anyway, that's some of what I know about those, or what I've been told. Uh, um, you also asked about sales tax. All right, so in order for us to change the sales tax, it has to go to a vote of the people anyway, because of what you mentioned in 1994, when Proposal A in 1994 passed, that put the sales tax into the state constitution. So the legislature can't change it on our own. We'd have to put a ballot initiative out there. And in order for us to do that, we'd have to have a supermajority to put that on the ballot. The last time that happened was in 2015. The legislature put a 1% sales tax increase on the ballot to fund roads, and that lost, I think it was 75 to 25. It may have even been 80 to 20. It got, just completely destroyed at the ballot box by the voters. The voters did not want to increase the sales tax. Personally, sales tax is probably my least favorite revenue instrument. It does have the benefit of being universal and also raising a lot of money on pretty small percentages because our economy in Michigan is pretty big. But what I don't like about it is that it is one of the most regressive taxes we have. Income tax, you pay more when you make more. Property tax, you pay more when you have a nicer piece of property. Unfortunately, renters pay the most property tax, which is a problem. But the sales tax everybody pays. And so one of the things I like to do is, I would love it if here in Michigan we could have a tax system where people in the bottom 20% of income and people in the top 20% of income and people in the middle all are paying a roughly similar percentage of their income in taxes, right? And in Michigan, that's not the way it is. Poor people pay a much higher percentage of their income than rich people. The top people pay, a couple percent less. Yeah, and it's all because of the fact that we have, everybody pays the same sales tax, and we have a flat income tax. It's one of the reasons why I'm a supporter of the Invest in My Kids ballot proposal that just started gathering signatures right now, because what they're proposing to do is they're proposing to have essentially what I would call a millionaire's excise tax. So for people that have incomes above $1 million a year, they would pay an additional, X percent, and then that would go into fund schools.
Okay. I signed on to that, actually.
Let me say one more thing about sales tax, though, because I think this is really interesting personally. I don't know, maybe it's because I'm a huge nerd. In Michigan, we have a 6% sales tax. You described as being kind of low, which I think that's a fair characterization, especially when you compare it to the South. But we do not charge a sales tax on many things. So we don't charge a sales tax on any services. And that was a decision that Michigan made when our economy was mostly not services, when our economy was mostly products. Well, now our economy is mostly services, not goods, not products. And so this is also one of the most unpopular things that I believe. I think rather than increasing the sales tax, it would be better to expand the sales tax to those kind of services. And I think the people who'd be most annoyed by that would be like your barbers, your folks who are house cleaners, folks who are doing a service job. I think those are probably the most compelling sort of examples of people who we might not want to have new taxes laid on them. But it would also mean that we would start taxing lobbyists and lawyers and accountants and all these other people who have, professional jobs that, have relatively healthy incomes that currently, don't have to charge sales tax on their services because they're services.
Okay.
So we can broaden the base.
I could understand and possibly support that. I think the only thing I would have an issue with is Down south, some states actually charge tax for food, and I
Yep.
don't think you should do that. I don't. I believe access to healthy food and water is a right, not a privilege. And so I would not support that. But on the services piece, even though it would hit me in my pocket because I use a barber, I get my nails done, I have an attorney, um, but I don't think that it would make or break me. Um, and we've got to do something.
Well,
We got to do something.
hopefully that's the most unpopular thing I'll say on here today. People don't love that idea because nobody likes taxes. Nobody wants to pay more taxes, right?
Right,
It's never popular.
right.
But we do need to think about, well, what's the right mix and what's a fair mix? And so in general, we have a pretty regressive system, and I'd like to make it less regressive, and that's my biggest priority.
Yeah. Well, people don't want to. I mean, as we wrap up, people that nobody wants to pay more, Jeff. It's just inbred in us. We just don't want to. But I do have faith enough in the people that our neighbors, that we can appreciate people being honest with us, whether we like it or not. And I think sometimes as elected officials, we're not as honest. I'm not saying we lie, but I don't know that we're as informative to our neighbors as we should be. When somebody's complaining about the roads, well, if you've not invested in them for decades, I mean, what do you think you're going to get? Your roof only has a certain lifespan. Why do you think your roads have an indefinite lifespan? So when
Yeah.
I say that, I mean, it would be nice if collectively all of us as elected officials could really say to people without feeling like we were going to get mowed down by bullets or something. Listen, we have not invested well in our own households. And so now it's time to pay the piper. And we got to figure out how to do that. Because if the house falls down, you're completely homeless. You don't even have a piece of shelter. So,
If you don't go to
um,
the dentist for a decade, you might think you're saving money, but then you'll find out that you actually were not saving money. And
exactly.
that's one of the things I keep preaching and lancing around these federal cuts to Medicaid and the state cuts to Medicaid. Like, what do you think happens to these people when they have a health condition? You think they just disappear? You think that their health conditions and the costs associated with those health conditions just vaporize because you cut them off Medicaid?
Yep.
No. They still show up in the nurse, or they still show up in the emergency room. They extend wait times. They cost more, and then we all have to pay for it in increasing premiums. And that's why now we're seeing massive premium increases coming to the market. And so hospitals are saying, look, we're going to have to cut services, and we're going to, the Michigan Hospital Association said they were going to have to cut 20,000 jobs from Michigan hospitals if this state budget goes through. So people need to know what's happening in Lansing. I try to give it to people straight. I try to just tell people what I think. It's worked for me so far, and I don't have any intention on changing my approach in that regard because I've always found that sometimes when you tell people something that they didn't want to hear, sometimes they get mad and they stay mad, and that's okay. But sometimes they get mad and then they think about it a little more and they're like,
Right.
okay, well, maybe there's some truth to that, or maybe I need to reckon with that, or maybe I appreciate when people are honest with me, even if I don't necessarily agree with everything they say. So that's the way I've always tried to play my hand.
Yeah. Well, and the silent people are the stakeholders, the stockholders that guess what? Maybe you're not going to get a 5% return on your investment. Maybe it's only going to be 3. Maybe you need to live with that. Well, I don't think we put any pressure on them at all. And we need to. We need to because they're just as responsible for their neighbors as we are.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. In fact, the argument I make to folks who are, worried about paying higher taxes because they're relatively successful is that, you'll actually be more successful if we attend to the needs of the community because your success
Mhm.
is platformed by the success of the community. And you look at states like Minnesota, look at states like Massachusetts. They do a lot more to invest in their communities and to invest in their people. And what do they see? They see job growth. They see their economy growing. A lot of times some of these business leaders will hue and cry about how taxes are uncomfortable to them. But the argument I make to them isn't to suck it up. The argument I make to them is that no, this is an investment in your future prosperity, and you will do better if you attend to the needs of your customers and your communities.
Correct. Well, Jeff, I really appreciate you taking time out today with us. I know it's Monday and typically you're not in Lansing, but that does not mean you don't have work to do. We kind of miss that sometimes. But I do appreciate you taking the time to come and just talk to my constituents and share information that they may or may not have. And, I hope what I'm doing with these conversations is keeping them even more connected. I get your postcards and newsletters on a regular basis, as I'm sure my constituents do. But it still never hurts to get, have an additional opportunity to hear from you, in between those publications. So I hope that this will not be our last conversation. This is the first year that I've done this. And so I hope that I'm going to have sort of repeat visits from all of the people that we've invited so far. And what I leave with all of you is if there is something pressing that you would like to get out, please feel free to reach out to me or Tabitha or Ashley, and we can get you rescheduled again. I'm pretty flexible. As you can see, these are only like an hour. So if there's something more pressing that you want to get out, in addition to, having to wait for like a print mailing, by all means reach out to me and we'd be happy to have you back on again.
Great. I appreciate it. I really appreciate you doing this. I always like to take these opportunities. So thanks for making it happen. And I'll just close by telling people that, we talked a lot about the budget. We talked about some of the policy things we're working on. There's a lot more going on. But maybe most importantly, I always like to remind people that even though what we talk about mostly is budget and policy and laws and that kind of stuff, there's also another purpose of a legislative office, which is that if you're struggling with navigating a system of state government, or you've got a question about like, hey, is this project available to me? Or, hey, I just moved here and I can't seem to get my licensure from Ohio, switched over to Michigan, or any sort of thing that is dealing with navigating the systems of state government, reach out to your state legislators. I can't promise you that we will solve all these problems, but I can promise you that we will try, and we will knock on some doors and we will ask questions, and we'll try to help you get the answers you need. And so I always like to not leave that behind, because the policy work and the budget stuff, super important. But I also like to remind folks that we also have just sort of like a very tactical service responsibility as well.
You do. And I should have said that at the beginning, because I think that's how you and I got to be um, in a position to be able to be comfortable enough for me to call you if I needed anything. Before I was even elected, I was connected to your chief of staff, my fellow commissioner Somerville, and it was related to friend of the court. I was helping a single mom, and your office was always extremely responsive and actually helped her get some movement in relationship to her case. And I am indebted to you for that, because it's rare. I hate to say it, it's kind of rare that you actually can touch and reach your elected and have them respond. I try to be that rarity for my folks, but you were that first for me and my colleague who needed some assistance with that. And so I really appreciate that. And it has kind of grown from that point. So um, you're
Well,
at the
thank you. I
top of
also
my
remember,
list for the
I,
likables.
I appreciate that. I also remember an EMU student that you were advocating on behalf of with
Yes,
respect to housing. That was one that stuck out to me. And that was one of my first memories of meeting you and seeing you advocate for that person's situation
yes.
and
So
helping to highlight it for us so that we could help as well. So
absolutely. So I'm a hugger, so I'm virtually hugging you. And thank you very much. And best wishes, at the start of this school year. You're a parent, so you know what that's like. And wishing you just energy and adult naps whenever you need them.
Oh, wow. Okay. I'm going to have to take advantage of that. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.